It's 1964, at the height of the Motown explosion in America, and three young women step onto the stage of the famous Fox Theater in Detroit. Their matching gowns shimmer under the lights, their tight harmonies weave pure magic. The group is the Supremes, and just about everyone knows the name Diana Ross. Many will also recall Mary Wilson. But there's a third voice, rich, powerful, and unforgettably soulful, that helped build this legendary trio from the ground up. That voice belonged to Florence Ballard, the very person who came up with the group's name and infused those early recordings with a strong, gospel-infused sound that took Motown to new heights. Today we'll dive into Florence Ballard, the founder of the Supremes, who was nearly erased from history, and ask what her story reveals about fame, about sacrifice, and about the price paid by so many women in the music industry. Born in Detroit on June 30th, 1943, Florence Glenda Ballard was the ninth of 15 children. Her parents had moved north during the Great Migration, seeking factory work and a better life, but money remained scarce. Detroit in the 1940s was a city of rapid change, with auto plants booming and an emerging black middle class. Still, in the cramped neighborhoods where the Ballard family lived, folks had to scrape by. Florence was surrounded by siblings in a small, bustling household, learning from an early age how to make the most of meager resources. What the Ballard family did have was church, and plenty of it. Sunday mornings meant an early start, with Florence and her siblings filing into worn pews to hear sermon after sermon. But Florence's favorite part was the choir. She would watch the older ladies belt out hymns in a fervent, soul-stirring style. Even as a child, she mimicked their riffs, practicing after the service ended, and discovered she had a natural gift. Her voice was clear and surprisingly forceful for a girl so young. The church provided the moral fabric of Florence's world, but it was also her first real stage. When Florence was around 15, her father passed away suddenly. His death destabilized the family even more. The modest income he brought home was gone, and Florence, reeling from grief, found solace in singing wherever she could. Whether in the living room after school or in local talent shows, she realized her voice could be a sort of compass, guiding her toward a better future. Around this time, she began spending time with neighborhood kids who shared her passion for music, among them Mary Wilson and Diane, soon to be Diana Ross, who lived not far away. They were all teenagers, dreaming big dreams while surrounded by the hustle and grit of Detroit's working-class neighborhoods. By 1959, the three girls, along with a fourth friend, Betty McClone, started calling themselves the Primettes. Their ambition was to snag a contract with Berry Gordy's Motown Records, the label that was putting Detroit on the map with acts like Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye, and the Miracles. From the start, Florence was the driving force. She was the one who insisted they rehearse, who believed they had what it took to stand shoulder to shoulder with Motown's best. Even in those early days, people noticed her voice. It had a depth shaped by the church that could sound both warm and commanding, and she was unafraid to belt it out, even if they were performing in a half-empty club or a friend's basement. In 1960, the girls got their foot in the door with Motown, though Berry Gordy wasn't fully convinced yet. They had to prove themselves, singing backup on recordings and doing any odd job the label threw at them. Florence, Mary, and Diane persevered, eventually landing a real Motown contract. The label renamed them the Supremes. Interestingly, that new name was Florence's suggestion. She wanted something that sounded regal, something that might capture the spirit of what they were aiming for, to be the best girl group Motown, and maybe the entire country, had ever seen. Those early studio sessions were a mix of excitement and frustration. Initially, Florence was given lead parts, her voice being the strongest, steeped in gospel power. But Berry Gordy had a vision, a smoother, higher pitch that might appeal more to mainstream radio audiences. Over time, Diana Ross's lighter, more pop-oriented tone fit that image. Gradually, the lead was handed to Diana on most tracks. It made sense from a marketing standpoint, at least in Gordy's mind, but it sidelined Florence, who was forced to step back into the role of a supporting singer. Even so, behind the scenes, many recognized that Florence's voice remained the group's soulful anchor. As the Supremes started scoring hits like Where Did Our Love Go?, Baby Love, and Come See About Me, the music world took notice. The group's polished style, synchronized dance moves, and glamorous gowns turned them into Motown's biggest female act. But while the spotlight zeroed in on Diana Ross, Florence found herself feeling overshadowed. She was teased for being a bit heavier, told to lose weight, and sometimes pressured to fade quietly into the background. Industry executives believed that Diana's sleek figure and charming stage presence were the better public face for the Supremes. Florence, who had co-founded the group and arguably possessed the most robust vocal chops, was being reduced to a footnote in Motown's promotional materials. These frustrations fueled tension. Florence had a fiery spirit, one that didn't take kindly to being told she wasn't photogenic or that her deep, more gospel-inflected style wasn't the right fit. She watched as Diana, rumored to be Berry Gordy's romantic interest, received more and more privileges, from custom-tailored outfits to extra vocal coaching sessions. Meanwhile, Florence felt she was being cast aside in favor of a friend who had once been an equal. She started speaking out, sometimes clashing with Gordy in private. Then came the gossip columns, hinting at behind-the-scenes drama. Fans noticed that Florence seemed unhappy on stage, and rumors swirled. By 1967, the stress was wearing her down. A combination of factors, her sense of betrayal, the constant touring, and her disappointment in being sidelined, pushed her toward alcohol. Her performances sometimes suffered, and Motown staff took note. Berry Gordy, never one to let personal conflict derail his business empire, made the call. Florence would be dismissed from the Supremes. It was done quietly, with minimal fanfare or explanation. One day she was there. The next she was replaced by Cindy Birdsong. The group was even rebranded as Diana Ross and the Supremes, effectively erasing any confusion about who the star was. Florence was left without a steady income, without the group she had named, and without the friendships she'd nurtured since adolescence. She tried to bounce back. In 1968, Florence landed a solo deal with ABC Records. Hopes ran high that she could replicate the success of the Supremes on her own, but the reality was grim. The label provided minimal promotion, and it seemed that the powers behind the scenes, likely Motown executives, were either indifferent or actively discouraging support for her. The single, "It Doesn't Matter How I Say It, It's What I Say That Matters," was released, but quickly fizzled. Florence found herself adrift, overshadowed by her former band's continued success. Loneliness took hold in a very personal way. Florence married Thomas Chapman, hoping for some semblance of stability. But the relationship turned abusive. Chapman was often unemployed, leaving Florence to struggle for money with no reliable support. He spent what little she had on gambling and other vices. Over time, they had 3 children, and the family ended up in a tiny public housing apartment, scraping by on public assistance. It was a bitter pill for Florence, once part of a chart-topping group that had lined Motown's halls with gold records. Now she was waiting in government offices for food stamps, occasionally recognized by someone who'd wonder, "Hey, aren't you that Supreme girl?" She found it humiliating and heartbreaking. When times got truly desperate, Florence reached out to Motown, hoping for even a modest financial advance. She wrote letters and made calls, but to no avail. She confided in friends that she felt abandoned, robbed of her rightful share of the Supreme's earnings, and cast away from an institution she helped to build. She felt ashamed and angry, but above all, she felt lost. Interviews from this period paint a portrait of a deeply hurt woman, still clinging to her passion for singing, yet defeated by the unrelenting hardships of daily life. In the mid-1970s, a glimmer of hope emerged. Florence, then still in her early 30s, decided to attempt a comeback. She rehearsed vigorously, tried to lose weight, and booked small gigs at local clubs around Detroit. Some nights the crowd was sparse, but occasionally old fans showed up. Remembering her from the Supreme's early days, she'd belt out the songs that once made her famous, her voice carrying traces of that old power, though it had been strained by years of sorrow and neglect. "I'm still a Supreme," she reportedly told one local reporter. "I never quit music. Music quit me." Yet her health and finances were precarious. After years of unsteady diets, stress, and heavy drinking, her body was worn down. She wanted a real chance to record, to reintroduce herself to the world, but no label was willing to invest. They saw her as a risk, a one-time star overshadowed by Diana Ross's unstoppable career and Mary Wilson's continued presence in the Supremes. In January 1976, just as she seemed on the verge of a new start, Florence was hospitalized with chest pains. On February 22, 1976, she died of a coronary thrombosis at just 32 years old. It shocked those close to her, though in hindsight, perhaps the stress and disappointment she endured made it tragically unsurprising. Her funeral was modest. Friends and fans chipped in to cover expenses because Florence's family didn't have the money. Motown offered condolences but no large tribute. Berry Gordy did not appear in any official capacity, and Diana Ross was absent as well. The woman who'd named the Supremes, who'd once been the engine behind their soulful beginnings, was laid to rest with minimal fanfare. Later tributes acknowledged her, but never with the intensity or scale that might have matched her contribution. In the decades since her passing, historians of Motown have begun to re-evaluate Florence's contributions. Mary Wilson, in her memoirs, spoke lovingly of Florence's comedic timing and big heart, while also acknowledging the heartbreak of their final years together. Even Diana Ross, in later interviews, expressed regret about the breakdown of their friendship and the way Florence was treated. Some fans remained skeptical about the sincerity of those sentiments, given how little was done to help Florence when she was alive. But the fact that she is even discussed now, recognized as a founding member with a pivotal role, suggests that her story has not been totally lost. Within the African American community, Florence's downfall is seen as emblematic of broader issues in the music industry, especially during an era that demanded Black artists look, behave, and sing in ways that made them palatable to white audiences. Florence's deeper, more churchy sound might have been considered too raw for the mainstream. Her body shape, not fitting the slim silhouette favored by American pop culture, became another reason to marginalize her. On top of this, the label's heavy-handed approach to controlling each artist's image meant that anyone who resisted, who didn't quite fit, often found themselves quietly sidelined. There are lesser-known stories that highlight Florence's warmth and humor. Former session musicians recall how she'd crack jokes in the studio, keeping morale high when they'd been recording for hours. Neighbors from Detroit mentioned that even after she left the Supremes, she'd sometimes host small gatherings in her cramped apartment, singing gospel tunes just for the joy of it. She loved to see people's faces light up. "I want to make them happy with my voice," she said, according to one old friend. It was never just about the fame or the money, though. She needed both. It was about sharing something that had been gifted to her in that church years ago. When word of her death reached the wider Motown community, many were stunned. Some said they had no idea how dire her situation had become. Others admitted that they'd turned a blind eye, focusing on their own careers. Over time, some old colleagues came forward with tributes, praising the natural richness of her singing. Fans, particularly older ones, took to local newspapers and radio call-ins, expressing sadness that Flo, as she was affectionately known, had been left to flounder. They donated what they could to help her children. Yet the heartbreak lingered. The Supremes' stardom was in the pop music pantheon, while Florence's name was little more than a footnote. For many older Motown enthusiasts, the mention of Florence Ballard stirs up strong emotions: compassion for her struggle, admiration for her voice, and frustration at the system that failed her. Online forums dedicated to Motown still light up with debates on the what-ifs. What if Berry Gordy had let her remain more visible? What if she had received better mental health support or had a champion in the industry who believed in her beyond the image concerns? But speculation can only go so far. We're left with the bittersweet fact that her recordings and a handful of interviews remain, capturing glimpses of a spirit both tender and tenacious. Near the end of her life, in one of her rare on-the-record interviews, Florence reportedly said, "I feel like I'm still that girl who sang in the church. That was me at my best, just singing for the Lord and for the people, no fancy dresses or anything." The heartbreak is that she never got to see a day when the industry or the public recognized that maybe that raw sincerity was exactly what made her special. Instead, she died with the knowledge that the group she named, the group she once led, continued to thrive without her. Yet, perhaps there's a sense of peace in the fact that her story has begun to be told more honestly. Younger artists, especially female singers who face their own pressures to conform, speak of Florence's experience as a cautionary tale. They see in her story the importance of standing up for one's self-worth, of not letting corporate interests overshadow individuality. And to fans who have long revered the Motown sound, Florence's voice in those early Supremes tracks, less polished, more gut-wrenching, remains a powerful testament to her innate talent. So here we stand, decades later, honoring the short, intense life of Florence Ballard. She was a pioneer who never got to fully reap the rewards of her pioneering. She was a mother, a friend, and a performer who made choices that, in hindsight, some might call mistakes. But they were also the choices of a woman fighting to preserve her dignity. In an industry built on the glitz of success, Florence represents the heartbreak that can lurk behind the stage lights, and yet her memory endures, a quiet, soulful echo that challenges us to think about how many other voices we might have lost along the way. Thank you for joining me in revisiting the life of Florence Ballard. She reminds us that history is often written by those who reach the top, leaving behind those whose contributions were no less critical. Her story is one of heartbreak, resilience, and a fierce passion for music, qualities that still resonate across generations. If you've ever felt overshadowed or forgotten, or if you've needed a voice of strength in your darkest moments, maybe you'll find a bit of yourself in Florence's journey. Let's remember her not just as a tragic figure, but as a talented, determined young woman who dared to believe she deserved a place on stage, singing her heart out for the world to hear